Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing this is why your dumper ghosts you. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast, and today we are discussing this is why your dumper ghosts you. So if you have been ghosted, it can be confusing and painful. But why would someone who loved you do this? In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 reasons why your dumper ghosts you. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is you upset them. So first of all, we're going to be discussing the element that perhaps you as a dumpee don't really want to consider, don't want to maybe even admit, but perhaps it is actually the truth. Now, when I say that you upset them, this is an understatement. If we're considering point number 1 to be accurate, which it might not, please keep listening through today's podcast to hear the other theories as per why your dumper may have ghosted you. But if we're to consider it is the potential possibility that you upset them, then I've really underplayed the reasoning when I say this. When I say you upset them, if they have ghosted you on that basis, then unfortunately you've really upset them to the point where they don't feel that they want to interact with you anymore. Now, if you've been ghosted, it can feel like you haven't been respected. It can feel like your ex has vanished into thin air. And of course, in a sense, that is what they're trying to do. They're basically trying to give the impression that there's nothing more to be said, and they don't even want to say that there's nothing more to be said. They just go. They're done, they're finished, they're gone. And therefore, if it is point number 1, if you have upset them, like I said, this is an understatement. If this is the element at play, then you unfortunately have really emotionally drained, you could even argue destroyed their thought process regarding you. Now, of course, I can't say for certain if this is the case, and maybe you don't even know for certain if this is the case, but what I would say is that if you think deep inside, if you think long and hard, if you're honest with yourself and genuine, you would recognise if this is the reason. You would recognise if the reason your ex just vanished suddenly without saying anything else is in fact due to your own behaviour. Did you do them wrong? Did you treat them badly? Is it an action you took, such as cheating on them? Is it behaviour over time? Was your relationship toxic? You have to consider these points. Did you upset your ex to the point where they didn't even want to say goodbye? They didn't even want to say, we can't carry on. They just left. Now, maybe you did have some initial breakup conversation. Okay, maybe this person who is now your ex did say to you, look, I think we need to end. So maybe you did get that initial moment, and this can still count as ghosting, in my opinion, if from that point they then just vanish. So some of you may have had almost a pre-warning. Some of you may have had your now ex say to you, look, this is the end, we can't carry on, I don't want to be in a relationship with you anymore. And then at that point, no matter what you say to them, ask, plead, reason, whatever it is you may be trying to get across to them, you get no response. So perhaps you had a very basic, small amount of conversation, maybe just a statement even from your now ex, saying the relationship was over before they vanished. But some of you wouldn't have even had that. Some of you would have felt that you was in a loving relationship and they've just gone. Unfortunately, there are some people who very much worry that something terrible has happened to their partner. Because one moment they believe they're in a relationship, and the next moment they've gone. There's no response. There's no message to say they're okay. Nothing at all. And it's only days, weeks, sometimes later, that you can actually discover and realise that yes, the person you felt you was in a relationship with are fine, they're okay. However, they're no longer wanting to be in a relationship with you, clearly by their actions. Maybe they've got a friend or family member to pass this message on to you. Every situation is going to be somewhat different, but in point number 1, we have to consider that the reason why you've been ghosted, no matter what way round they've actually done this, is in fact because you upset them. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is they don't want to hurt you. So this is a real flipping of the script, you could say, from point number 1. Point number 1, they felt that you'd upset them tremendously and they never wanted to speak with you or see you again. Point number 2 is not in that realm. They don't hate you, they don't feel any bad will against you, but they just don't believe this relationship can continue. So if we're going to take this back to the beginning of a connection, so we can fully understand what I mean by point number 2, is that when you and your now former partner were in a relationship, you were both feeling a high level of romantic emotional attraction for one another. Now, for various potential reasons, your now ex-dumper, unfortunately for you, the dumpee, started to lose romantic emotional attraction for you. And in point number 2's instance, I would suggest it's more likely to have been a slowly but surely losing attraction over time. Now, for whatever reason that may have occurred, slowly but surely, month by month, week by week, day by day, they're feeling less romantic emotional attraction. This doesn't just mean physical attraction, although it could be a part of this. It means everything combined. Physical, mental, spiritual attraction. Everything combined, they're not feeling the same way they once did. And when this level of attraction hits the necessary low point, this is when your now ex wanted to action the breakup, because they're not feeling enough attraction to be within this connection with you. But it doesn't mean they hate you. It doesn't mean they're angry at you even. It doesn't mean that they're scared of you. It doesn't mean anything that could have potentially been connected with point number 1. Instead, it has just been a lot of romantic emotional attraction. They don't feel it anymore. But because they don't hate you, but yet they still don't feel enough attraction, they're in this dilemma of what to do next. Because they don't want to hurt you. They don't want to upset you. They probably think you're a really good person. They probably think you're in this particular situation where they feel that they love you, but they're not in love with you. Maybe you've actually been told this. Again, some of you would have heard a few words regarding the breakup. Maybe you were broken up with via a text, in person, on the phone, very briefly, and then they vanished, never to speak again. However, some of you wouldn't have heard anything at all. One moment you think you're in a relationship, the next minute that person seems to have gone. And if it's connected to point number 2, it's because your ex-dumper doesn't want to hurt you and they don't want confrontation. They feel that if they discuss the breakup with you in any depth, things are going to get very emotional, potentially destructive between you both, and they don't want that. Now, I'm not here to say that's right. In fact, I think it's somewhat wrong. I do believe that they should have discussed things with you fully at the time of a breakup, but in their own mind, they're thinking, if I speak to my partner and end the relationship, they're going to be destroyed. They're going to be crying. They're going to be emotional. I don't want to see that pain. I don't want to see that upset. I don't want to see that confrontation. I don't want to be involved in all of this mess. So the best thing I can do is just go. Now, of course, that isn't really the best thing they could do. They could do things much, much better than this, but that is their mindset if this is connected to point number 2. Now, another element regarding this could be the fact that they are worried that if they discuss the breakup with you in any depth, you will try and persuade them otherwise. They might feel that you could be successful, even though they don't want to reconnect. They might feel that you have a power of persuasion, they can't say no to you, and they don't want to give you that opportunity to sway them, because they believe right now they will regret that. Now, who knows in the future how they will feel, whether it's point number 1, 2, or what I'm going to speak about shortly in point number 3. All of these potential people who have ghosted you may still one day in the future regrow romantic emotional attraction and reach out to you. People who've been ghosted do sometimes hear from their ex again. It's not a definite you'll never hear from your ex again if you've been ghosted. It's of course not a good sign, and I would say your odds of success are somewhat less if you've been ghosted because of the way that the person's end of this connection is so sudden, and in some instances connected to this, you could argue that they've made their decision with a lot more thought and power to think, okay, right, I'm doing this, there's no turning back. And some people might even be embarrassed to turn back. They might feel that they can't turn back. But certainly some people who have been ghosted in the future hear from their ex again. So whatever your scenario, it is still possible to reconnect, but let's be honest, it's not a good sign. Now, if you would like support and guidance on how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more details about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast. About this is why your dumper ghosts you. And point number 3 is they weren't invested. Now this can be the biggest shock of all. You're in a relationship, maybe it's a few months, maybe it's even years. Whatever the situation you find yourself in, if it's connected to point number 3, then your ex, the dumper, was not as invested in the relationship as not only you were, but what you thought they were. And this can be particularly confusing if you've been together for a number of years. Because once you've been together years, you're going to believe that your partner is just as invested in the relationship as you. And sometimes that isn't the case. Now, point number 3 is going to be more so connected to shorter term relationships. But like I just said, sometimes longer term relationships can also fall within this bracket. So what exactly does it mean that they are not invested? Well, what it showcases is that although they have a level of romantic emotional attraction for you, it's never hit the high point that perhaps you felt towards them. It's always been in that mid-range where they're feeling okay, but nothing spectacular. Perhaps you've never really had an argument. Perhaps you never felt that they were unhappy, but maybe if you're honest with yourself and you think back, you'll recognise that they never seemed ecstatic about your relationship. They just seemed okay, so, it's alright, it'll do. This is a situation that you might find yourself in where your now ex-dumper just wasn't really invested. And the problem with this is that if and when they want to end the relationship, they can just go. And sometimes, as I've said, it could be many years into the future. And this can be a really real big shock to somebody who is very invested in the relationship, thinking it's going on the right lines, you've been together many years, and the other partner just disappears. They vanish, they go. And you're thinking, how can they do this? Why can they do this? Well, if you could speak to your ex-dumper right now, and if they fall into category number 3, they would be saying to you, well, I just wasn't feeling it anymore, and I thought I'd go. And in their mind, that's absolutely fine, because as they weren't very invested in the relationship, they never assumed that you could be more so than them. It can be very confusing to understand this, but what I would say is that most people regarding point number 3 are within the avoidant attachment style. Now, some of you will know about attachment styles and some of you won't, but in essence, when we are very young, when we're going through our formative years, as babies, as children, we form attachment to our caregivers, who generally speaking are our parents, and the way we build that bond and that relationship and that attachment style to our parents will translate in later life to how we interact with other people in romantic relationships. I'm not going to go into this in too much depth right now, but point number 3, they weren't invested, they can just vanish and ghost you. Often you find these types of people have an avoidant attachment style. They find it more difficult to form closer emotional bonds. They find it easier to almost drift off emotionally, not really have a depth of feeling that perhaps you do. Maybe you're somebody who has a secure attachment. If they're an avoidant, they're going to find it easier to just go. They're going to find it somewhat confusing that you find this really bad. If you were to speak to them, they'd probably say, well, I wasn't really feeling it anymore, so I just left. Now, this can also sometimes be connected if somebody monkey branches to a new partner. We can't ignore that fact as well. Sometimes people who ghost their partner are actually moving from one relationship to another. You might find the shocking realization that the person you believe to be your forever partner has not only just ghosted you, but they're now in a new relationship. And this can be very difficult to get your head round, but when you think about it, in a way, from their perspective, it makes more sense. If it is regarding point number 3, they weren't as invested as you, so if and when they find somebody that they feel a bit more invested with, they just jump, branch to branch, person to person. It doesn't mean it's any less painful for you, but that can be sometimes the explanation as to why this has happened. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.